Good evening and good morning and good afternoon, whenever you might be watching this. Welcome to the Joko, to this week's Joko conversation. I am Brother Youssef, a member of the Joko Collective. Happy to be with you, and I am joined by the original convener of the Joko, my partner and comrade, Tasha. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Yusuf, and hello, everybody. Um, Greetings and embraces and all of those things. Um, Greetings and good wishes. Greetings and courage. Greetings and optimism. Um, so we always start by acknowledging our personal ancestral lineage. All of those parenting people and energies and situations that um, inspired in us the drive to be people who are centered in their life path on bringing about a just world, making the world a better place, as they say, but bringing about a just world because it don't have to just be, we don't have to lowball it. We just want a little bit better, and that will be okay, right? Because there's this this belief system that says that something good and or peace on earth is only something that can ultimately be wished for, can't really be had, but it's noble to wish for it. But happily, our parenting energies and the forces that have made us the people who we are say that no, the world can be just. um, we know how as human beings. We have had and lived um, in a more humane world, right? In humane worlds, and we have the agency to create the world we want. And so, what a blessing indeed to be of that mind and on that path. And we acknowledge all of those energies that have brought us to that place, to this place. We acknowledge as children and now of mothers and fathers and grandfathers and the folks in the grandparent generation of Africa. We acknowledge the African human family, um, and all of the champions of the just world that it has borne, who have brought to bear on the problem of dismantling this system of global oppression and extraction and domination and violence and brutality and horror and anxiety and all of these things, brought to bear their ingenuity and creativity and courage and problem solving ability and strategy and all of the good things, all of the marvelous human qualities brought to bear um, on this what has become the human problem of dismantling this system. And certainly the African family has been a major contributor to that solution set. And we remember and always put in the forefront that any work that we do for the liberation of our people, for the liberation of humanity, is done um, on these grounds in um, so-called Los Angeles, in colonial U.S. We do it at the hospitality of the original people who have not ceded these territories, whose grandchildren and progeny still practice original cultures, work to preserve those cultural systems and languages and cosmologies and all of the good and vital things, and bring them consciously to bear on solve to the project of solving these same set of problems. So we know who we are to have been brought as cargo, right? We are not um, foundational Black Americans, whatever that means. We are part of a much older lineage, and we know we came as cargo, as chattel, and our alliance is with the indigenous peoples who are still those who are still in their continuity and in their cultural force, um, and living in their sovereignty. And so we always open with those kinds of statements to center us in our conversation, to center the conversation and any points that we raise. And that being said, Yusuf, I pass the mic back to you.
Okay, so two things that I noticed when you're rocking back and forth.
Oh,
It's much better lighting when you stay forward, right? And we can
okay,
see clearly if you stay forward. And
okay.
you
Solution.
want to recommend you take off your glasses unless you absolutely need
Oh,
them because of the reflection. But
okay. I need
you
them
can
in the,
stay
I'll need them in a
close.
minute.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
but if you can stay close to the camera, you're much clearer. And your
Okay.
head, the light behind you creates a little glare, so it's
Okay.
probably moving to your right.
We can solve that. I'm about
Yeah.
to solve
But anyway, yeah,
it.
you can
Okay.
see your face so much more clearly when you stay forward like that. So yes, please.
Very good.
And yeah, that it makes a big difference. Um,
Okay.
so, actually, I got distracted by that. There was something you said even earlier at the beginning of your comments that I wanted to come back to, but never mind. It'll probably it'll probably come up again um, at some point. The But our our subject for the night, things are unusual for us, right? We're rarely doing this on a Friday, but we're doing it on the Friday because of the poetry reading we attended on our usual Thursday. So, but didn't want to not get a Joko conversation in this week. And something just happened with Tasha. Tasha's device has disconnected. So I'm sure Tasha will be back in a moment. But as I was saying, it's unusual for us to be here on Friday, but we didn't want to go the week without doing this again, or waiting 2 weeks in between. Our conversation, our title for tonight: the U.S. writing a check its ass can't necessarily cash. And we've already seen that underway, right? As is being reported by several news sources, several sources in the what we now know as the legacy media. Um, the US and perhaps Israel also were really unprepared for the level of resistance from Iran over these last 2 weeks. The And independent reporting, because we're getting very little of that reporting, at least that I've been able to come across in the mainstream, in the U.S. press. I don't even want to say the Western news media, but the U.S. news media. um, how effective the Iranian retaliation has been. Um, Iran absolutely taking a lot of damage,
Mm-hmm.
losing a lot of people and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
But making the U.S. and making Israel pay the price for it. Um, so
Mhm.
we now know in the what is often touted as the region's only democracy, Israel,
Mm.
there's been a ban on reporting, right, and reporting on the damage
Mhm.
uh, that is being inflicted in Israel, and
Mm.
now not only by Iran because the Hezbollah has
Mhm.
also started retaliating. The
Mhm.
and likewise here, right? I hear reports from independent sources and international sources on the damage to U.S. installations in the region and U.S. Naval ships that is not being routinely reported in the U. Again in the U.S. press at any rate. Um, I think the European press is listening to Donald Trump and this regime, and slowly kind of uh, um, disconnecting themselves right from the U.S. The Anyway, so hints are, the U.S. is writing a check its ass can't cash because they're taking casualties, and the global economy is taking a hit because of it, and so there's a real um, well, wonder is probably the wrong word. Um, Reporting again that they were completely unprepared
Mhm.
for the Iranian
Mhm.
response, didn't think
Mhm.
through the implications for global trade, and whether or not and how they might secure the Straits of Hormuz. Um, so again,
Mhm.
um, even if they are having what they think of as or what they're declaring military victories with their air war, again whatever
Mhm.
those objectives are beyond
Mhm.
um, the Gaza model, right, of just trying to
Yes.
flat the region. um,
Mhm.
it's not going as smoothly as they thought, right? This again another notion of a quick, what, 48 hours,
Yeah.
something like that, that's now turned into two
Mhm.
weeks
Mhm. Mhm.
of being hit back, right? And
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Um, yeah. Um, that part that we're just gonna go in and hit them right quick and um, be out, right?
Hmm.
Um, hasn't isn't mapping out, and I'm hesitating because I'm actually trying to highlight something I want to read and put in the comments um, article for folk to look up and find, because why would they think that this is going to work, right? What would make them think that this is, everything's going to work out? And one of the things that we know about the right about the regime, one of their driving forces is that good old fashioned, they're invoking that old school white supremacy demon, right? Ain't learned nothing, really, right? Really trying to live in the height of European expansion, really trying to, um, right, I guess, visit glory days when it looked like Europe was inevitable and uh, undefeatable, you know, all of the things that you also talk about in terms of the new manifest destiny. It's the old manifest destiny. It's not new. They're just
I
reclaiming
think
it.
that's exactly reinvigorating, right? Um, right. What's the word? Jump starting the white man's burden again.
Jump starting the white man's burden, with a new right twist of, we're no longer going to be burdened. We're just going to be the great and glorious, race that we were meant to be. Right. And of course, we know all about the Christian nationalism of the folk that are in these seats of power, um, and are certainly riding on, um, their sense of inevitability, right? And
Mm-hmm.
their sense of being, the chosen people. Don't need to repeat all that. We know they
Yeah.
think they're in Armageddon and are inevitable, are going to a higher glory. But Ajamu Baraka, early in the early on, submitted put out an article, Iran and the psychopathology of white supremacy, and just want to read a couple of paragraphs from that, um,
Are
just
you
in
able to
terms of,
share a screen?
I'm sorry.
Can you share a screen while you read?
uh mm, can I haven't shared
Uh,
screen on StreamYard, so
You should be able
yeah.
to though. Just
Okay.
you should have a share screen option right in your ellipsis or you are you able to see that present or invite
Yeah,
slide?
I do. I
Yeah.
see that. Well, okay, yeah, forgot how to do this. All right, so let's see if I can do this without it being, without you seeing
Hmm.
everything on my
Hmm.
desktop. Not planned.
Just open up the article first.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Just
Yeah.
takes time and it's not planned. So, in any event, uh-oh, am I still on? Yeah, okay.
Yes, as far as I know. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Let's see. Um, okay. I don't want to share either of those. All right, here we go. We can do this. Here we go. All right, so
Yeah, there we go.
for you, you got it? Okay.
Hmm.
So, um, then I will start at the beginning. So he has this fabulous picture of Hegseth, in one of his dramatic poses, dramatic gestures, you know,
Hmm.
sweeping and imperial. Um, Iran and the psychopathology of white supremacy. Baraka writes, the sincere belief that the sadistic brutalization of the Palestinian people would sever their connection to their land, that a 60-year siege on Cuba would compel its people to abandon their revolution, or that assassinating Iran's revolutionary and spiritual leadership would force the country to surrender its sovereignty to its historic tormentors in the United States and the Zionist ethno state of Israel. These are not simply policy miscalculations, they're manifestations of what I call the psychopathology of white supremacy. This psychopathology is not reducible to individual prejudice. It is a racialized, narcissistic, cognitive disorder embedded in the ideological and institutional architecture of Western power. It centers Europe and its settler extensions as the apex of human development and renders its adherents incapable of perceiving objective reality when
Hmm.
confronted non European resistance. Let me read that again. Renders its adherents incapable of perceiving objective reality when confronted with non European resistance. While rooted in the historical experience of Europe and its encounters with non European people during the expansion of European power, it can affect anyone socialized within the ideological and cultural mechanisms of the pan European colonial project. As a non material conceptual frame, it nevertheless produces material consequences. Since the first sustained emerging European powers and the non European world, this affliction has shaped policies that devastated societies, cultures, and millions of lives. It ensures that Western decision makers repeatedly construct strategies that are counterproductive even to their own long term interests when dealing with non European peoples. And just stopping right there as we talk, I might pick something else quotable out there, but that
Hmm.
is like directly what we're dealing with. This is not a
Hmm.
this is not an abstraction. This is not conceptual. This is literally what we're dealing with: a group of people who feel themselves be invincible by virtue of their whiteness, you know and um, positions of their position as hegemon. However, um, uh, what is the word? Um, however, I think the word is tenuous. However tenuous that grasp is, even as they're watching it dissolve and fall away, a total inability to uh, deal with that in a practical manner. You know, um, this desperation
Oh,
to
exactly. That's the sense of desperation because it's slipping away.
because it's slipping
Cling.
away.
So the effort to cling, 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 hold on.
Absolutely. Um, and not be able to um, figure out how to uh, let go of the hegemony, let go of this control and the position of control in any kind of organized way, right? In any kind of
Hmm.
organized or systematic, or something that would be
Hmm.
the path of least harm and damage done.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, um, all of the conversation and in all the coverage, any interviews done with the heads of state who are um, talking to the media, the the resolve, the resolve, the um, ability, right? The ability to organize uh, themselves around what they understand about the right the capacities, the mentality, the ability to what take historical patterns into account. And so these European um, journalists and interviewees have these perplexed looks on their faces when the folks said, "No, we've been waiting for this. We've been preparing for this. We've been for a very, very long time, and being prepared for this moment." So um, that is the a huge part, of
Hmm.
the inability to respond in any intelligent way, right? So now you gotta save face. Now you gotta, you know, destroy a whole lot more than perhaps you intended to or thought you were going to do if you're gonna have any kind of retain any kind of standing, and none of which is guaranteed. None of which is guaranteed because you also don't really exactly know what you've gotten yourself into. And even if it's becoming clear what the door you've opened and what you've gotten yourself into, um, you're in check. You're in check. Your pieces are played and their pieces are developing and you're in check. What do you do? What do you do? So, what is it called in chess when the player realizes there are no other moves? It's
Check.
not a four. No, it's not check.
Yeah.
There's something that the player who's in check does, and it's essentially a forfeit. But there's a fancy chess
Yeah,
term,
yeah,
chess
I wouldn't know.
for that fancy chess term. I don't know, but in any sense, that is also not an option. So um, let's see. All we can do is really kind of like watch the show as
You know,
and
empires don't quietly, give it up. I mean, um, this action in Iran, several historians and commentators have compared it to the United Kingdom's action in the Suez Canal in the 1950s, trying to make a
mm,
move, seize the canal from um, independent Egypt under Nasser,
mm-hmm,
and it just hastened the decline, and really, I don't know, it made plain the decline of British power, I guess, and that's followed by what a wave of uh, former British colonies, gaining their independence, um, and the effort to create this thing called the Commonwealth as a neo-colonial measure of
mm,
control, but nonetheless, right, the momentum had been set, and the same thing in France, right? It's France coming out of World War II, clinging to its colonies in Africa, in Asia, wanting, um, needing to be roundly defeated at Bien Dinh Phu in Vietnam, and still though, right? Again, through the francophone community and and
mm,
the CF Frank system, right? Able to cling to its empire in some kind of way through again, neo-colonial relations, and even now, right?
mm-hmm,
These folks, wanting to find ways to cling. Or I mean, empires don't give up. They don't give up their territories easily. It raises questions, I think, about the idea of the Soviet Union as an empire,
mm,
or and the Eastern Bloc as an empire.
mm-hmm,
When one thinks about the way in which the Soviet Union dissolved itself,
mm-hmm,
certainly under
yeah,
pressure, various kinds of pressures, but it dissolved itself, right? There was,
mhm,
and maybe after, um, experts in the area might say, yeah, after, years of trying to cling on, right? Maybe the 80s was its effort to cling.
mm-hmm,
I don't know, though. I'm not sure that that's really accurate, though. But it makes it unique. You think about, again, I think, but if I brought it up a week ago, 2, 3 weeks ago, as an example of what Justinian did in his effort to reunite the empire,
mm,
the ancient Roman Empire. But the point being, not wanting to give it up, right? Um,
mm-hmm,
after it had already been divided in two, and the Western Empire had for the most part, fallen. Um, this effort to cling, and yeah,
Mhm.
so that right now, with the again the United States as the spearhead of the empire of the West, and looking to cling to power that has been waning for how long? Right, for what, at least 20 years, 30 years waning. I mean, I know there was that sense of the U.S. is the one superpower with the fall of the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
But for how long? Was that
Mm.
even the case? While in the meantime, China
Mhm.
continuing to develop, um, Africa on its own trajectory, Asia and Latin America, um, still struggling, right, in neo-colonial relations, but still on this momentum. You keep disappearing into your screen. Can you stay close to the camera?
Is that better? Can you?
No,
Am I back?
can't see you at all. I'm not sure why. It's probably the lighting somehow. There you are. The
Okay.
Anyway, and the key word in that title, right? Psychopathology. What you wanted to read twice, right? The inability to see the objective reality, to deal with the objective reality, right? It's the delusion, the delusional aspect. It is a mass mental health issue, right? That's
Mhm.
cultivated,
Mhm.
cultivated by the culture, the
Mhm.
narratives of history, um, the how those historical narratives are turned into common sense, the common sense of the society, even if fictional or semi-fictional, through the popular culture, right, through movies and television.
Mhm.
And I guess we could say streaming now, right? That wants to picture the history of the world and the development of the world in a particular way. That, yeah,
Mhm.
always centers white individuals, European individuals, European societies, culture, historical development as somehow the history of the world, or the only history that really matters. And so those you've disappeared again. Those reporters that seem so caught off guard, because this, it's out of the realm of their imagination.
Mhm.
Think that one, somebody could stand up to the West in any particular
Yes.
kind of way,
Yeah.
or that not everybody wants to be Western, or just adopt
Mhm.
the values, the so-called values of Western societies. Right? The
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a well, I think he used that language, right? This kind of cultural
Mm.
narcissism, right, and
Mhm. Mhm.
civilizational narcissism. But again, that's been
Mhm.
cultivated, right? These are the messages that everyone gets, and it's the mass media apparatus of the empire, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It spreads that message everywhere, so that even
Mhm.
in countries that have their own well-developed media um, infrastructure and film, film culture, film industries, and
Mhm. Mhm.
narrative industries, they're still infiltrated, right, by
Mhm.
Western. I don't well by Western content, right? Western cultural content, Western popular culture.
Mhm.
So it's the delusion of that indispensability. It regenerates right through that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
This uh, taken as the
Yeah.
normal, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that it feeds the psychopathology of white supremacy, such that that's why I don't. I've always had well, let me not overstate that. I always felt like um, the idea of that white nationalism, the way it's often used, is
Mhm.
um, is insufficient or somehow
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
inaccurate because
Mhm.
the United States is a white nationalist. The project is already white nationalism, and that so that
Mhm.
often what people are
Yes.
meaning in the
Yeah.
contemporary context when they say white nationalists are the
Yeah.
militant white nationalists, right?
Mhm.
The non-governmental militant white nationalist. Um,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the entire project of the West,
Mhm.
right, of what
Mhm.
the self-named, self-identified the
Yes.
West, the conceptual
Yes.
West, because we know it isn't an
Yes.
actual regional description. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
they're they're they have been rooted in a white nationalism, right? The U.S. is
Mhm.
a white nationalist project. Um,
Mhm.
that had to be,
Yes.
the non-white folks and white allies who had to intervene to
Mhm.
extend, say no, right?
Anytime. Right.
And never
Yeah.
has been because there always been the presence of these non-white people.
Right.
And ditto for Australia, ditto for New
Right.
Zealand, ditto
Right.
for the settler colonies of Latin America,
Right.
ditto for the
It's the
settler
same.
colonies of Africa, etc. Right, and the
Yeah.
modern nations of Europe, who,
Mhm.
as they came out of the notion of Christendom into the new nation
Mhm.
states, emerge as these white nation states because they're emerging at the same time they're coming into contact with all the various non-European people that
Mhm.
Amu Baraka addresses in
Yes.
the article, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
a 500 plus year old
Yeah.
history of the development of this delusion
Yeah.
with some precursors, in the late Middle Ages and early modern period, because certainly the we know the Spaniards were already using that language of white and black in relation to the Moors, um,
Mhm. Mhm.
pre-Columbus. Right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, that delusion. This why they can't see, or yeah, well, can't, right? Can't see what's
Mhm.
right in front
Can't
of them.
and it's a can't, yes, can't see what's right in front of them because there is a true believer dynamic, and then there's a cynical perpetuator
Mm-hmm,
dynamic, you
mm-hmm,
know, as well. It's the narratives that are useful to maintaining power, the fundamental interest in maintaining power and expanding the or securing the capitalist position, um, and accumulating more wealth and control and all of those things, and the right, and as the process unfolds, the understanding that well, whatever the truth might be, whatever might appear to contradict the narrative that supports, that helps people to capitulate
right.
to this stride, right, toward, or this process of more accumulation and consolidation of power, are ignored, discredited, um, marginalized, all of
Mm-hmm,
that language. So there is this an awareness always, right, that can be shown of the untruth,
Right.
and the and those that decry, oh, but this is untrue, and those folks are are dismissed. And then right there, there's the population um, that is fed, right, the information, um, who have who have the true belief,
Mhm.
are the true believers. And so all of these kinds of things, yes, has these literal psychological reverberations. But something that we just can't understand, that how can you think that, how can and these ideas, some of the fundamental narratives that support white supremacy have not been, they haven't been displaced. This effort, toward social justice education and multicultural education of the last, how many years would you say? 30?
Well, at
Is it
least, I
about
mean, longer than that, start hearing the word, the phrase multiculturalism in the 70s, right?
okay?
And
Okay.
certainly,
Well,
but really
yes.
begins to pick up sort of momentum late 80s into the 90s, right? And through that kind of activism you're talking about, that develops out of the various movements of the mid 20th century, right? To expand the franchise,
Right.
expand notions of democracy,
Right.
and um,
Right. Who's relevant and who should be studied and all of these things. But in terms of it also being something that's, hey, there needs to be a curriculum. This needs to be something that is taught, and it's not just right. What is the word? Some kind of can't find the word, but a body of knowledge that's removed from popular consumption. Right, needs to be, right. So
yeah,
hence the
exactly. Right. It needs to
curriculum
be
of
integrated
inclusion.
into the. So we used to use that language in the late 80s, right?
Mhm.
Integration, right? Integrating the curriculum was the
Okay.
phrase that was used, with
Mhm.
that idea of this,
Mhm.
ethnic studies needs to not be sort of a specialized area
Yes.
over there, which it can certainly be for intense study, but should also be part of the general education.
Right. If it's true, it needs to be known. It needs to be part,
Right.
right? Right.
Because it
In the
is
interest
indeed part
of
of the story of the country, the hemisphere, the modern world,
the
right? All the
it's part of
various,
the proper story and should be
yeah,
represented, right?
the full
And
story.
so also part of that piece with the um, notion of the white nationalist and the image that comes to mind, the American mind when the phrase is heard, is also a curated, and controlled notion, where the responsibility for the violence, the uh, myth making machine, the narrative generator, was able to um, uh, saddle the lower class white person with that label, right? With the, okay, these are the white supremacists. These are, the white
Right. Yes.
supremacists are
The
contained
idea that,
in a
yeah, the typical Klan
F.
member is a working class,
Right,
white person, the so-called redneck
right.
who works in the sun.
And exactly. And the quote unquote uneducated, and
Right.
the association of white
The
supremacy with
disaffected white
lack of,
poor. Yeah.
yes, and lack of education and whatnot, when scientific racism was just that, seated in the halls of academia and perpetuated
Mhm.
globally.
Yes.
And,
Academia, the pulpit. Yeah. And
in
indeed,
all of the
those,
places of,
so if all the workers were in the Klan, the the Grand Dragon might be a business owner, right? And certainly the White Citizens Council, right? The polite white
hmm
citizens, fully in,
hmm
so we know, right? Dr. Gerald
yeah,
Horn, right? He uses the term, he's been using the term class collaboration. Um,
Mhm, mhm,
Class
mhm.
collaboration
And the
among the
yeah,
settlers.
is is the reality, but the
Mm-hmm.
poor white is scapegoated as the
Mm-hmm.
as the terrorist, you know. Um, when literally they can't even carry out their terrorism without the support of the state and without
Mm-hmm.
the right
Or at least the support
the
of a particular class.
who run the state, who manage
Yeah.
the state,
Yeah.
and like
Exactly.
what I'm thinking about is the fundamental
And
phenomenon.
you use the term scapegoat, right? I wouldn't use the term scapegoat because often they are willing instruments, right? So
Yeah, they
I
are willing
understand what you
instruments.
mean in terms of,
Yeah,
all of the attention is deflected over there, right? Look at the white poor, is
right.
aren't they the problem? I get that, right? But yeah, but
Yeah,
it is a class collaboration. Um,
yeah. So everybody
in
has
the
their part to play.
in the interest of the delusion, the psychopathology of white supremacy. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
precisely.
Mm-hmm. Be
That
a part of that whitening. So
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and that that has been the case, right, with this current moment and the Trump regime, and everybody looks at the MAGA base, and with that notion of
hmm
the MAGA base as
right.
the poor whites, and there certainly are enough
Mm-hmm.
of them, right, that are firmly in that base, but we also know that there are plenty of well-heeled folks, just like the Tea Party movement actually had
Mm-hmm.
a average profile of folks who had stake in the society because they were actually doing quite well in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Same
Mm-hmm.
with what the profile of the average January 6th insurrectionist is actually doing quite well, not necessarily white working class feeling a great deal of
Mm-hmm.
economic strain.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
and then we know just in terms of the open rule of billionaires this time, um, you know, and their
Mm-hmm.
open uh, racism. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to,
And so,
yeah, go ahead.
yes, I was going to say, so therefore, segueing back to our topic,
Mm-hmm.
what they cannot imagine, what the downfall there is, um, you cannot imagine your vulnerability. You cannot. It cannot be imagined that these non-white people um, can overcome
Mm-hmm.
this order. That can't be
Mm-hmm.
imagined. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was do the same thing, right? So to bring that back to the title, right? The this writing a check that they can't necessarily cash. The
Mm-hmm.
and the comments from the Secretary of Defense today,
Mm-hmm.
indicating the and touting, right, the military superiority of the United States and Israel,
Mm-hmm.
the crowing over the devastation that is in Iran, clowning the current, the newly installed Grand Ayatollah
Mm-hmm.
because his first comments weren't
Mm-hmm.
recorded. They were, because it was a written message. This is somehow a sign of the success of the mission. Because why wouldn't he record it? And just some really juvenile type stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything is like a success, and we are devastating in our power, right? And um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we're going to have these folks, uh, um, well, completely decapitated, right? And all the various things, right? The overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
power and supremacy of the United States and its partner Israel.
Mhm.
However, and
Mhm.
I put in a correction in the comments last week. The reporter that I was trying to recommend, I have it right this time, and I will put it on the screen. Um, on YouTube, independent reporter, John Taka reporter, right? And he is routinely reporting about um, the Iranian military successes because it isn't being reported in other places. So the
Mhm.
fact that, and he's not the only one reporting this, right? In independent
Right.
sources,
Mhm.
um, that
Mhm.
that the successful hit against the USS Ford and such,
Mhm. Mhm.
and again things we've talked about, right? This $20,000 to $30,000 drone that was able to damage this billions of dollars aircraft carrier,
Right.
such that it has to now retreat for repairs, either to be repaired on site, which will is possible, will greatly diminish what it can do, or it has to come all
Mhm.
the way back into port to be repaired, which means it's out of commission for 3 to 6 months, right? So
Mhm.
that's a military success on the part of the Iranians,
Mhm.
and what that means
Mhm.
for its entire, aircraft carrier group of ships and planes and all that. Likewise, with
Mhm.
the USS Abraham Lincoln has had to withdraw because they're taking hits. It's been reported, right, that there are more U.S. casualties from this refueling
Mhm.
airplane that went down in Iraq.
Mhm.
The official
Mhm.
report
Mhm.
is that it was neither friendly fire nor hostile fire. That the official report, right? Janta Ka reporter is reporting that a Shia group in Iraq, in
Mm.
solidarity with Iran,
Mhm.
are claiming knocking
Mm.
it out of the sky, right? And quite frankly, can we believe anything that this White House tells us?
No.
Can we believe anything that
No.
Israel tells us right now? Folks who are actively suppressing information coming out of the region. And we know
Mhm.
that, again, particularly in the West, it is often reported, Iran is trying to punish
Mm.
everybody, right? Attacking its neighbors in the region. But it's perfectly
Mhm.
clear for those
That
who
is
looking for the
strategic. Yes.
reports that they're
Yes.
attacking U.S. installations.
Yes.
And one of the allies,
Yes.
I think one of the ministers from the United Arab Emirates, was also making that point. Um,
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
why they are getting attacked, and they know it's because of the U.S.
Mm. Mm.
Installations, and quite frankly, folks need to be rethinking their relationships with the United States. And I think he was
Huh.
responding to some misinformation, right, coming out of the Trump regime,
Mhm.
who are committed to showing no weakness, right? This whole notion that you can't show
Mhm.
weakness, and so,
Mhm.
and can we ever expect truthful reports, accurate reports, or at least full information, coming out of their releases? I don't know if you heard the latest of what when the U.S. will know it has accomplished whatever it's trying to accomplish. Did you hear the latest on Trump?
No.
Saying, "Yeah, I will feel it in my bones." Is when,
Stop.
but this is the country we live in now, right? It is not a
Oh my
country where
God.
decisions are made based on data, where
No.
the leader of the U.S. military, I guess maybe you say the two leaders, right? The commander in chief and the secretary of defense are both so underqualified, unqualified, and
Mhm.
unwilling to listen to the actual
Mhm.
experts in the room, and have already
Mhm.
purged those who would, speak truth to them about what's going on, and replace
Mhm.
them with
Right. Right.
other crusaders, right? Other folks interested in the crusade. Although I still, even just looking at the image that you showed from the article, right? That particular
Hmm.
press conference, even
Hmm.
there, you can see the distinction, right, between the decorum of the general or admiral that was up there
Yes.
and Hegseth, right?
Yes.
And even in their
Yes. The
comments from that
flamboyance. Yes.
press
Hmm.
conference, right? So that even
Hmm.
now within the actual U.S. military, there ain't a whole bunch of happiness, right, with the civilian leadership, the the um, the ambiguity of this mission, and now again the prospect of troops on the ground because it did not turn out the way they thought it would turn out. Even though Hegseth wants to claim we've got the Strait of Hormuz under this fool. I mean, the things that came out of that man's mouth today. So what did he say? Strait of Hormuz isn't a problem. We've got it under control. The Strait of Hormuz is open. The only problem is that Iran keeps shooting ships. So if Iran stops shooting the ships, we're fine. Well, th- this is what folks are trying to tell you. That that's what it
Oh
means for
God.
the Strait of Hormuz to be closed.
To be
Iran is going to keep
closed.
shooting ships. It's like, but it's the delusion again, right? The commitment to the psychopathology. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz is open unless we say it's closed, regardless of what the facts on the ground are. Right? It doesn't matter what the facts on the
And
ground
then,
are.
and also the way in which they've learned
Oh, wait a
through
minute. Hold on.
these.
Hold on. Hold on. The point I was getting to is
I'm
that
sorry.
now they're sending a Marine unit. So is the next step the boots on the ground, as folks are
Mm-hmm.
saying, and again something they didn't expect they would have to do, and now they're
Mm-hmm.
sending a Marine unit to the area.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
With what you were about to say?
Well, it makes me say two things. I hope I remember the first thing. It'll come back, but that part about the boots on the ground, where that was a floating around in it was being floated, as they say, uh, last week, right, in the quick
Mhm,
development of all of this. That was one of the
mhm,
questions that one of these American journalists posed to an Iranian representative, right? Um, so are you concerned about, the US military coming in, boots on the ground, essentially, soldiers on the ground,
mhm,
to which the representative responded, "No, we're not worried about that. We expect that. We
mhm,
understand what, everybody understands what the choices are. There's no confusion, you know,
mhm.
about how this will unfold,
Yeah.
And I think that he said, and I hope I'm not confusing this with something else I've seen or read or heard or, whatnot. But I think that the representative said that the desert will swallow them. They'll be
Mhm,
swallowed. They'll be, you know what I mean? That there's,
mhm,
in all of the conversation now about, okay, so you're going to send these boots on, how are you going to get in? And
right,
how is that going to work out? What is
right,
that looking like? you know
right.
so um yeah, the all of this bluff and bluster, that's what I was going to say. With all of this bluff and bluster, there's uh uh no realistic thinking, totally
Yeah.
out of touch and with the situation and understanding. I think it was Ted Cruz being interviewed. Someone was interviewing Ted Cruz not too long ago, and he was making some bluff and bluster comments, and the journalist asked him, "Well, how big is Iran? you know, about what's the approximate population?" And they gave one of the typical Republican deflection
Mhm,
answers. Well, I'm no expert on da 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 da. He says, and so the journalist gives him the approximate number, right? And then he
Hmm.
poses, some other question, which he deflects with one of those absolutely ridiculous responses that they have learned to give, because they understand that their is not expert. So the base understands, or it's a convenient excuse. It's, whatever excuse you want.
Yeah.
Can we really be expected to know everything? I'm no expert in that, but you know what I'm trying to say. You're trying to do so and so and so and so and so. Anyway, the
Yeah.
journalist said, well, don't you think you are supposed to know that?
Shouldn't you know? Aren't you a
Don't
senator? Right?
you
Aren't you on
Yeah.
a committee? Just
Don't you think
exactly.
that's
I mean, I'm
you
waiting for
know?
somebody to ask. When the Trump that same question. Why was it
Yeah.
yesterday? He was asked, "Well, what do what's your response?" Right? It has been confirmed that that school
Yeah.
was hit by
Yes.
a U.S. missile.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that? Oh, I don't know anything about that. Can somebody follow up and say, "Well, why don't aren't you the president?
Why
Shouldn't
don't
you know
you?
about that?" Yeah, why don't you know? How is that fulfilling the obligations of your office, right? How can you not know about that?
Yeah.
How's that not a dereliction of your duty? I mean, can we get
Yeah.
some kind of follow up? That seems basic. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Very basic. And just take the hit. Worth it to end on that note. They may not let you back into the press corps. They may not let you back into the you
right?
right
Take the hit.
the briefings and what have you. But wouldn't it be worth it? Wouldn't it be worth it
Right.
to end
When
on
it
that
would
note?
be, right? And what a service it would do, right? What
What
a
is
service it would
exactly
do. And
of
then your colleagues
exposure?
should keep doing it, right?
Yes.
Just
Yes.
I mean, we already know this stuff, right? Just like bad as they are, every Democrat last year and this year should have got up one by one and followed Al Green out of the State of the Union,
It's
etc. Just all these ways of demonstrating your refusal, and your um,
yes.
you
And,
not accepting this, right? Um, and that
not
refusal. I
accept.
mean, again, coming back to that. That the inability to deal with the objective reality, or the commitment to always denying it, because you just this commitment to never admitting failure, right? What is it? Is
Yeah.
that one of the Roy Cohn lessons, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Never admit
Mm-hmm.
failure, never
Never,
admit you're
never.
wrong,
Right.
even if
Right.
you are,
Right.
you just never admit it. The
Right.
so again, that's why I'm so appreciative of the work that John Takad does, because he and others, right? They are routinely reporting on um, well, on who's getting hit, when, and where, right? You're getting, he's reporting on the damage that's being rained down on Iran, on Lebanon, but also the other way, right? And how the other countries are responding. So, we can get a fuller picture than we're getting from Western press, basically, and certainly
Mm-hmm.
from the folks in the regime who are not going to report accurately, because it goes against what, all they want to do is project victory, right? So we're not getting
Mm-hmm.
images of the damage in Tel Aviv,
Right.
for
Right.
example, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
resistance that is now coming from Lebanon, who wasn't in it, right? And to the best of my knowledge, Hezbollah stayed out of it until
Uh-huh.
Israel decided to start bombing. To the best of my
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, they stayed out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because again,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering this correctly, and I hope that she's okay. That Rania Khalek
Yeah. Yeah.
um, reported, last week. I think I'm spelling her name right. Reported last week that the you know the
Mm-hmm.
it's not Rania. Oh yeah, it is. Um,
Mhm.
that the Lebanese government had requested, for
Mhm.
Hezbollah, can you stand down, right? To not give
Mhm.
Israel a pretext. I hadn't heard anything about them shooting any missiles. I hadn't heard. As
Mhm.
far as I
Mhm.
know, Hezbollah did
Mhm.
stand down until Israel attacked. Now, if
Mhm.
I'm wrong, okay. But even if I am
Mhm.
wrong, it was already defensive, right, on Hezbollah's part, because Israel is routinely invading
Right.
and incursions
Right.
into and threatening Lebanon, part of its greater
Mhm.
Israel
Greater
project,
Israel Project.
right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so those are being effective, right? We're getting those reports. Um,
Mhm.
and this war is both, it's unpopular among the citizens of the United States, and it is
Yes.
unpopular in Israel
Mhm.
also.
Mhm.
And we
Growing
know
up
there are
popularity is
the zealots in both countries, but generally it's unpopular. And everybody knows Bibi needs war to stay in office.
right.
And
Right.
more than that, just like Trump, to stay
And
out
out
of
of
jail.
prison. Stay out of prison.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Stay out of prison.
these
Yeah.
these crooks.
It's really kind of amazing. It's really kind of
Hmm.
amazing. And the
Hmm.
failure of the American press, with
Yes.
very few exceptions, the failure of the American press, not only the failure of the American press to give any kind of appropriate reporting, but the extent to which it has been enabling this regime to consolidate. And I know, for for reasons that are not so mysterious, in terms of questions of ownership, and corporate ownership, and who owns what, and who's directing what, and all these kinds of things. But in journalists,
Hmm.
um, that complicity, the end of the fact check,
Yeah.
on that, because that
Yeah,
was
that's
the whole
right.
thing, counting the lies, that also the Democrats did not pick up. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in the context of the congressional hearings and investigations that are ongoing, and what have you, that's a contained situation focused on specific issues, and there is a lot of challenge to veracity and declarations. This is a misrepresentation, this is a lot, what have you, and quite a bit of theatrics. But in terms of an ongoing, um um point by point, uh, attack on the lie machine, or just just a uh, takedown of the lies that are put out, the misrepresentations that are put out, and whatnot, um, woefully lacking, and contributing to the how we got here of it all,
Absolutely.
and also, everybody could see what's coming.
Absolutely.
It was like it was not hidden. It was there. Nothing about
Absolutely.
this was hidden. A
Well,
few. That's what I was going to say.
the
Back.
Democratic
That's
leadership.
that's what I was going to say. A few steps back was part of this, in terms of why they get up there and say anything that comes to mind. I'll feel it in my bone. Feel like they can say anything, is because one of the things that they learned going through this process with Trump is just how low the bar is, just how
Hmm.
much they can say any damn thing and it will
And
roll.
you're talking
There's
about the congressional Republicans. When you say they, that's who
yes.
you mean. Yeah.
I'm talking about congressional Republicans, but I'm talking about the people who are always in front of the camera. I'm talking about the Hegseth, any Republican talking at any time, that is supporting, repeating,
Yeah.
the talking points, the explanations, repeating the BS, from Trump to Hegseth to Carolyn Levitt to any of
Huckabee,
those folks,
all of them, yeah. Ted
Huckabee, all
Cruz,
of them,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And anyone who has a chance to try to get their moment to show their loyalty, and you know what I'm
Yes.
saying, and repeat
Well,
the
that's the point of, yeah, yeah,
repeat the,
exactly.
the script, they do it because they've learned that they can.
Well, that's
They've
what I
been
was,
so
and
thoroughly
there's no
marked
pushback because
well.
there's no real opposition. You know,
Yeah.
the fact is the leadership of the Democratic Party is quite happy to see this war in particular ways. You know, they're anti-Iran also. You know, they're
Mm-hmm.
maybe they might have wanted to conduct it a different way, or again the uh, the reliance on the procedural. Well, you didn't come to
Mm-hmm.
Congress to get, you know, a resolution, or you know, only Congress can declare
Mm-hmm.
war. You know, with true enough,
Mm-hmm.
tepid enough, right? But
Mm-hmm.
not really
Mm-hmm.
challenging. Now there's been, you know, as it's been clear how unplanned, right, underprepared, and all these assumptions that they must have made. So you know, we're going right, getting ready to go into the third week. So you're beginning to hear um, pushback
Mm-hmm.
about how unplanned this is, et cetera, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you know, that should not be mistaken for. They would be quite happy, you know, to see some kind of success. These, you know,
Mm-hmm.
APAC, pro-Zionist, pro-U.S. empire, you know, Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, as we
Mm-hmm.
know, they are the two parties of the duopoly are absolutely complicit in their foreign
Mm-hmm.
policy. Again, they might
Mm-hmm.
argue over method, but not goals.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where's the real anti-war opposition coming from? Certainly within the Congress, I haven't heard any beyond, you know, sort of complaints about and critiques about how it's being executed, not whether or not it
Right.
should necessarily happen
Should
in a
be.
way, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know, if they had had a clearer
Right.
plan, et cetera, and all that, you know, they would likely be okay with it. So, you know, so it's the people again, right? The opposition is coming from the people, and as historians and independent journalists have been pointing out,
Mm-hmm.
this war is already as unpopular as the Vietnam War became after several years, right? I
Wow.
think the Vietnam War became unpopular after the Tet Offensive in '68, I think. So there was, you know, several
Mm-hmm.
years of it, you know,
Yeah.
relatively supported by the general public. This started out with
Mm-hmm.
70+% opposed, again, across that political
Mm-hmm.
spectrum. And in the
Mm-hmm.
meantime,
Mm-hmm.
you know, speaking of the complicity of Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
I see, was it either yesterday or maybe it was this morning, something about congressional Democrats um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
writing a resolution, introducing a resolution on war with Cuba. So are they setting the groundwork for the legal invasion of Cuba from the
Mm.
Democrats, right? So the
Right.
Democrat
Right.
that was reported. The Democratic congressional Democrats are preparing a resolution on war with Cuba. And again, based on what? You know, what threat
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
Cuba? What
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question of, you know, we already know the lies around Iran, around some imminent threat that nobody can produce the intelligence on, but just keep saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Some an Israeli minister being interviewed. Well, what was the intel on the imminent threat? What was it? Well, the last 47 years of them chanting death to America, death to Israel. Okay, but what about this specific moment? Of course, he had no answer for it, right? Because there
Right.
is no rationale. And however much they want to report it about the nuclear threat, the Iranian leadership, the religious leadership, the clerical leadership, and particularly the late Grand Ayatollah, there was a fatwa against chemical weapons and nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
They were not,
Mhm.
they were
Mhm.
a religious ban on the development of nuclear
Right.
weapons, which now may be
Right.
lifted because, under the circumstances, so anyway, a different calculus. But as who was it? One of the former CIA officers
Mm.
was, I don't think it was Larry Wilkerson. It was anyway, that whole point. The one person who was keeping Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons is the one person you
Details.
killed, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
now,
Right.
but still, we'll see,
Yeah.
because
Right.
it, there's still there's still the strong sense of this is halal, right? Or not halal, haram, right? The
Uh-huh.
nuclear weapons, right?
Uh-huh.
This is
Uh-huh.
sin. It is sinful, right? To
Uh-huh.
anyway.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
so here we are, right? The U.S. in this
Mhm.
situation that
Mhm.
it has stumbled
Mhm.
into, along with
Mhm.
Israel,
Mhm.
and I'm with you. I don't believe this. Israel leads the U.S. around, right? Or as they say, the tail that wags the dog. No, it's U.S.
Mm-mm.
policy, and as
Mhm.
they have admitted, as
Mm.
Joe Biden admitted, right? Israel is necessary for the United States. Israel is their what do they call it? Their aircraft carrier, right? Their on land aircraft carrier. Nonetheless, though,
Mm.
Israel does act with agency, and
Mhm.
Israel doesn't
Mhm.
always do things exactly the way the United States wants them done, and
Mhm.
is willing
Mhm.
to um, use that
Mhm.
agency to get the U.S. to
Yes.
do things it once done. Not yeah, so yeah, Israel was
Mhm.
and well, Israel attacked first, and we know Marco Rubio gave the game away, right? Um, and actually,
Mhm.
even reports before that were giving the game away. There was concern that Israel would attack first, and Iran would retaliate, which would then require the U.S. to enter the war. And it didn't exactly happen
Mhm.
that way. Israel attacked first, and the U.S. said, well, let's just jump on in. And then Iran
Mhm.
retaliated. But so I think this is
Mhm.
one of those situations where let's not get it
Mhm.
twisted. Who's at the head of the empire? And Israel serves the U.S.'s purposes in the region and in other areas. But Israel does act with agency and has its own ends in mind. And I think in this case, did act in a way to bring the U.S. in. And then just among the individuals, whatever the relationship between the United States and Israel, that interpersonal relationship between Trump and Netanyahu can play that
Mhm.
fool. I mean, because
Mhm.
almost anybody can play that fool. You
I was gonna say
compliment him
who
the right
can't.
way, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Appeal to his
Mhm.
narcissism.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that, in this
Um.
case, all of that's happening.
Mhm. Um. And and in terms of this check that um can't be cashed. I mean, as you're saying, or as you just said, this war is already as unpopular as Vietnam was a few years into it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
resistance to it and refusal to serve in it, I think will be, is going to be equally as
Yeah.
immediate. It's
Yeah.
already brewing. It's already
It's
happening.
already
And
brewing.
people
That's
haven't,
right.
boots haven't even gotten on the ground yet.
Exactly.
And
And it's
people are
already
calling
brewing.
in saying, I
Right.
ain't going. Yeah, people are
That's
already
right.
calling in saying, I ain't going.
I'm not going. That's right. And
Um,
partly because of what's the
yeah.
rationale? I mean, partly just, throwing our
Well,
lives
yeah. If you don't
around
know
like we are
anything
chess
else,
pieces.
and another thing also, I think that there is a bit of like, to the extent that some of this, let me just say this, that some of the um, social media based journalists, and I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
necessarily talking about citizen journalists, I'm not talking about the, citizen journalists having
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated discussions, but trained journalists who are YouTube based,
Yeah.
and doing kind of are pushing in ways the media to deal with approach topics that they otherwise would not have, because the public having access to these, I mean, there's a whole other possibility of understanding the narrative, and challenging the narrative that's coming down. You know what I'm saying? Because if you tap into the right vein, and you get a whole other level of a whole other depth of explanation, and a whole other um, uh, connection of the dots that allows folks to see much clearly, not unlike the um, not only uh, journalists based in social media, but all of the kind of social media that exposed Palestine, and that has discredited Israel, and that kind of explosion coming from the social media realm, pushing the narrative in a different direction. So the kind of ability, if the ability to say anything is being challenged from a quarter, it is that quarter, because folks are having access to quality information. Um, Something that I did want to say that I heard earlier, um, as folks are, putting in their 2 cents, and a lot of folks bring up the military. Um, Someone was brought up an angle. Their projection was that the hit on the school represented a uh, a botched use of an automated, this automated missile system that they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get together. These AI driven automated um, missiles and weapons, and um, what they brought up was that the school was built over a old IRGC barracks, and that it was possible that the programming, right, the AI programming, still had that registered as a military target based on its former use as a barrack. And he was, so basically how he backed that up just as a logic and a possibility, um, was that he was like, in some of my AI stuff, searches, that Charlie Kirk is still alive, and he gave some other example, right? But so um another element,
Well,
another
the
element
AI
in
possibly failed spectacularly also. The AI that's supposed to
right,
move
Mr.
society,
Based on
technology forward, and all that is too just another machine that makes errors. The
to just another machine that makes errors, yeah,
because the
and
humans
can
that create
only,
make errors, and
and there you go, and there you have it,
yes,
so it itself may have been up to date, So,
Hmm.
and and so of course he delivered all this in a kind of a tongue in cheek, and so what could possibly go wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, um, another element, I believe they call it
So what
a
another thing
cluster.
we haven't spoken about, and I don't, we can save it because we've been at it for almost 90 minutes.
We're here,
The
yeah, yeah.
but again, the part of the belief, or at least the apparent belief, in their inevitable success as the West, um, is these notions of a holy war that they are waging. Um, this this fits with the goals of those those elements of the religious right that are trying to hasten what they see as Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
Those elements of this regime, and those they represent, that never get enough of fighting and killing Muslims, in particular, right? That are, again, that are still fighting the Crusades. And
Right.
I mean, it right. Um, Pete Hegseth
Mm-hmm.
has it literally tattooed on his skin, right?
Right.
Um, the Crusader motto, right? Um, so
Mm-hmm.
we didn't,
Mm-hmm.
that too is part of the delusion, and even
Mm-hmm.
their sense of inevitability and invincibility, as it has
Mm-hmm.
been
Mm-hmm.
part of the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
since we see that propaganda in the paintings of Columbus with the priest and the cross right next to him and all that stuff, right?
Stuff,
God,
right?
gold and glory, right? Or that is
Mm-hmm.
that is, they're still fighting that, right? They're still fighting the Crusades, and and indeed, I guess in some ways, like one might say, they never stopped fighting the Crusades. That we, the um, the expansion of the West, in the beginning in the 16th century in particular, but I guess again we could say the 15th century with the Portuguese, um, coming into what, Morocco, Central West Africa, um, attacking the trading cities on the Swahili coast of East Africa. These 600 years, right? But there was always an element of crusade, right? And um,
Mm-hmm.
this is, I guess, part of the context for that. The papal bull that people often point to. I forget, was it Pope, one of the Alexanders, Pope Alexander, the line of demarcation that says, Spain, you can have this, and Portugal, you can have that. And you have the right to enslave and colonize any infidels or non-believers as you come across them. And that's been very much the project of the West, since then. And as we talked about a little last week, a little at the beginning today. This was Rubio's message, right, at the the conference in Munich, rather, um, as he
Mm-hmm.
was lauding the West, and the expansion of the West. And it's time for them to no longer apologize, right, for their history, this modern history of invasion, enslavement, displacement, genocide, and the establishment of capital and capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
that maintains their
Mm-hmm.
empire, or for which the empire is maintained, right, at the detriment of
Mm-hmm.
the planet and everything on the planet and everyone on the planet. a crusade for the cross and prophet, and they're still fighting it, and it's part of the delusion that keeps them from seeing the objective reality that they are paying a high cost, and that indeed we're all paying a high cost because of this war of choice. All of it. All the way the cost of living is about to go up. So anyway, we're going to see
Yep.
how this plays out. The
Yep.
unpopularity, the
Yep.
uh, how whether this whether this eats into that MAGA base at all,
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
life is becoming increasingly unbearable in the United States. I just
Yes.
heard a report that folks with the wherewithal to have
Yes.
401ks are
Yes.
now going into their 401ks
Yep.
so they can eat, so they can pay their
Right.
bills and stuff, right? So this whatever is supposed to be
Right.
in their savings, they can't save, right? Because the
Yep.
cost of living is skyrocketing and all that other stuff. So anyway,
Right.
we're into 90 minutes. You got any closing comments?
I don't have any closing comments. I think it's, it becomes clearer and clearer, and the pressures are, it's going to accelerate, you know, and the pressures will mount quickly.
Yeah,
There is I think at the end of the month, another No King's Day
that's right. There is on the
nationwide
28th. Yeah,
rallies, right, being planned. And I'm sure we're going to see quite a bit of anti war protesting,
yeah,
old school anti
which is
war
which has
protests. I
been
mean,
going on
there's
anyway.
already,
Yeah,
anyway,
but
which is, yeah,
it's going to
been
be
going on anyway.
supercharged.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
going to be a huge part of that.
I
Because
wonder
people haven't stopped being in the streets. Actually, people haven't stopped being
because
in the streets.
people haven't stopped being in the streets. That's right, even though it isn't always being
Mhm.
covered. And I will give again. I want to give her this credit. Rachel Maddow has been very good every week at, hey, these are the demonstrations that continue to go on, and been
Mhm. Mhm.
routinely reporting that, and using the resources available to her to point out all these places around the United States and sometimes U.S. territories where demonstrations are going on. The first
Mhm.
so no the second No Kings March was bigger than the first one, whatever the first
Mhm.
major mobilization is. Now
Mhm.
that you've added
Mhm.
the anti-war sentiment, should expect this one to be even bigger. Folks are wondering if, at what point are will these demonstrations reach that percentage threshold that folks keep talking about, 3% of the population, something like that in
Mhm.
protest. It's often an indicator
Mhm.
that the regime is not going to last. We'll see
Mm.
how that plays out. But I think what
Mhm.
last
Mm.
reports, the last big No Kings might have got up to like 7 million people in the street, which that much closer to that whatever that threshold is. Um,
Mhm.
could we see 8 to 9 million this time around? And it's still a couple of weeks away, with more momentum to
Mhm.
build as people get more and more frustrated. Um,
Mhm.
more and more
Mhm.
frustrated with U.S. sailors coming home in coffins, the lack of reporting on U.S. casualties, and et cetera, right? And
Yep.
the rising cost of living and the real possibility,
Yes.
because Iran hasn't done
Yes.
everything they could do yet in the Strait of
No.
Hormuz. So the very real
No.
possibility that the global economy can shut down in that way, right? Um, anyway,
Mhm.
we will see. We will, we'll continue the conversation because I do want to talk more about the religious aspect because to me it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
most dangerous aspects, and
Yes.
this commitment to, and I believe in the realm of Christianity, whatever the denomination, well, maybe it's completely heretical, right? That you can set up the conditions, right, to make the end of the world happen as it's understood,
Hmm.
among some Christians.
Hmm.
This is that
Hmm.
alone, right? I mean, that's the whole
Hmm.
passage. What is it? The story of Jesus, the 40 days in the wilderness and being tempted by Satan. And
Hmm.
one of them is,
Hmm.
thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God, right? And this is a version of you're going to set it up. I mean, so I know that in
That was.
pretty much all mainstream Christian denominations, that's heretical to even. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the gospel stories has Jesus saying, "No man knows the time or the place," right? As these people are
Mm-hmm.
declaring, they know the time and the place. So anyway,
Right. Very. Yeah.
that the element of danger that
Mm-hmm.
the religiosity,
City.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
adds to the brings to this, we can
Yes.
fold into the conversation along with some of the other stuff we didn't touch on because this is all
Yeah.
encompassing really right now, and everything else is still
Yes.
going on. ICE is still doing its
Yes.
thing, right? The
Yes.
Department of
Yes.
Education is still being dismantled. The
Right.
EPA is still being dismantled, and they are
Yes.
committing war crimes at a rate that did we hear it last night that somebody from the Bush administration was like, or did I hear that this morning? Somebody from the George, I think I heard it this morning. Somebody
Yeah.
from the
That
George
was
W.
Colonel
Bush.
Wilkerson.
Yes, right.
Lawrence Wilkerson. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lawrence Wilkerson.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was right. We have committed. We know we've
Mm-hmm.
committed, and they've already committed more, right? And so anyway,
Yeah.
there's more for us to talk about. And I was specifically thinking about the EPA made me think about it. The war crime of blowing up all
Yeah.
these petroleum depots and um, um, infrastructure, so that now oil is raining from the sky in
Awful.
Tehran and maybe throughout the country.
Awful.
But yeah, so basically, a form of chemical warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much more for us to visit, and who knows by the time we are doing our Joko again, what more atrocities and what more ass
Mm-hmm.
kicking that both Israel and the U.S. will have, and their allies in the region who ought to be thinking
Yes.
we need to rethink these U.S. bases right now.
Yes. Right. Quick. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And who's to say
Um,
they won't? Who's to say they won't? Mm-hmm.
why
What have they
wouldn't
got
you?
to hold on to? Yes. What
Under
have they
these
got to hold
circumstances,
on
why
to?
wouldn't you? Right. And who's getting
Mm-hmm.
killed in those places? Again,
Yes.
it is so underestimated.
Right.
The number of migrant workers that work in those Emirates, that work in those Gulf states, that in some cases, the majority of the population are these migrant workers um, and guest workers who don't have any citizenship rights, right? But you know what? The bombs are hitting them too, right? So anyway, we're ending. We will get back to this.
Yeah.
Everyone who joined us, thank you for joining us. Whenever you're watching this, we appreciate you. Please do the things that we need you to do. Please subscribe to our channel as we are slowly building our subscribership. Please like the video, right? You know, we need those likes for the algorithm. The tyranny of the algorithm is real. We always want you to share. We are still waiting for you to comment, right? Please, you know, somebody comment for us. Join the conversation in that way. That would be a wonderful thing. The There was something else I wanted to share, but I guess I'll come back to it next time. Anyway, I'm
Mm.
Youssef. That's Tasha. We are the Joko Collective, and this is Joko Conversations. We really appreciate you. We will see you next time, and I will close the way I always close, quoting Bob Marley from the Natty Dread album, Bob Marley and the Wailers, the song Revolution. Revelation reveals the truth. It takes a revolution to make a solution. So let's make a revolution, y'all, and we will see you next time. Peace.